Before we begin, if you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18-plus ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper, darker, and more intense versions of these stories are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. Now, take a breath. Let the modern world fade away. Let me tell you a story. There is a very specific kind of silence that exists only in the dungeons of an imperial palace. It is not a peaceful silence. It is heavy, damp, and smells faintly of rust, wet stone, and broken pride. When I finally opened my eyes, the cold of the stone floor had seeped so deeply into my bones that I wasn't sure if I was shivering from the chill or the lingering fever. My back burned. A dull, rhythmic throbbing spread across my shoulder blades, a harsh reminder of the 20 lashes I had taken the day before. Let me explain how a prince ends up bleeding on the floor of a foreign dungeon. My name is Jian. 5 years ago, I was the crown prince of the Yan Kingdom, a beautiful, prosperous land of southern rivers and blossoming plum trees. But beauty does not win wars. The great Chen Empire swept through our borders like a winter storm. They burned our banners, shattered our gates, and forced my father to his knees. To spare my people from total slaughter, I surrendered myself as a political hostage. For 5 years, I was stripped of my title, my silk robes, and my dignity. I was forced to live in the Chen Imperial Palace as a shadow guard, a glorified, expendable servant to the very man who had commanded the army that destroyed my home. Crown Prince Shenze. Now, as of 3 days ago, Emperor Shenze. Shenze was a man carved from jade and ice. He was devastatingly handsome, terrifyingly brilliant, and utterly ruthless. And for 5 years, he had made it his personal mission to break me. He kept me close, assigning me as his personal attendant and guard, forcing me to pour his tea, polish his armor, and stand silently in the corner while he made decrees that erased my homeland from the maps. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to weep for my lost kingdom. He wanted me to look at him with the terror and reverence he commanded from everyone else. I never gave him the satisfaction. I swallowed my pride. I locked my royal blood away, and I became exactly what he forced me to be, a quiet, obedient, unbreakable ghost. Which brings me to the lashes. 3 days ago, a missing seal was found in the servants' quarters. A crime of treason. It belonged to an older servant who had once sneaked me an extra bowl of rice when I was starving. So when the imperial guards came looking for the culprit, I stepped forward. I took the blame. Shenze, furious that I had supposedly stolen from his study, ordered me whipped and thrown into the dark pavilion. I think he expected me to scream for mercy. I didn't. I just gritted my teeth, took the pain, and let them drag me down here. I sat up slowly, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood to keep from groaning. My white linen shirt was stuck to the wounds on my back. My long black hair, tangled and loose, fell over my face. I leaned my head back against the freezing damp wall and closed my eyes. Well, I whispered to the empty shadowed cell, at least it's quiet down here. But my peace didn't last. I heard them before I saw them. The heavy rhythmic sound of military boots echoing down the stone corridor, the sharp clatter of armored guards stopping at attention, and then the unmistakable, slow, deliberate footsteps of a man who owned the world. The heavy iron door of my cell screamed as it was pulled open. The sudden light of a torch blinded me for a moment, and I had to squint against the glare. When my vision cleared, he was standing there. Emperor Shenze. Even in the dim, wretched light of a dungeon, he looked like a god of war. He wore robes of midnight blue silk, heavily embroidered with silver wolves, the crest of his empire. The robes clung to his broad chest and wide shoulders, trailing down to the floor. His face was a masterpiece of cold, sharp angles, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes so pale they looked like shards of winter ice. He exuded an aura of absolute dominance. The air in the tiny cell suddenly felt suffocatingly thin. He smelled of crisp pine, cold steel, and expensive incense. He stood over me, looking down at my battered, exhausted form sitting on the stone floor. His expression was a mask of cold fury, but his pale eyes darted to the blood seeping through my shirt. "The warden tells me you haven't asked for a physician," Shenze said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "Nor have you asked for food or water. Are you trying to starve yourself in my dungeon, Jian? Another one of your silent rebellions?" In the past, a hostage prince would throw himself at the emperor's feet. He would beg for forgiveness, swear his loyalty, or at least cry out in pain to garner pity. I didn't move. I just looked up at him, my face completely blank. I noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip he had on his heavy silver ring. He was angry, yes, but there was something else underneath it. A restless, unscratchable itch. He was a man who conquered nations, yet he could not conquer the quiet defiance of his favorite prisoner. I slowly pushed myself up. The pain in my back was blinding, causing me to stagger for a fraction of a second. I caught myself against the stone wall, keeping my breathing even. I didn't try to look presentable. I didn't bow. I just met his icy gaze with absolute deadpan calm. "Your Majesty," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of water. "I simply didn't want to bother the imperial physicians. I'm sure they have more important people to tend to than a thief." Shenze's eyes narrowed, a microscopic shift, but I knew him well enough to see the danger flashing in them. "You are not a thief!" Shenze stepped closer, the heavy silk of his robes brushing against the dirty straw on the floor. "We both know you didn't steal that seal. You took the fall for a kitchen slave. You sacrificed your own flesh for a peasant." "Does it matter?" I asked softly, sighing. "The punishment was dealt. The crime is paid for. If you've come to order me back to the laundry quarters or the stables, just give the word. I'd like to get out of this cell. It smells like mold." Shenze stared at me as if I had lost my mind. The deep, controlling anger in his eyes flickered, replaced for a brief second by genuine bewilderment. He had expected a broken man, weeping and desperate. Instead, he got a tired worker ready to clock in for his next shift. "You took 20 lashes, Shenze said, his voice dropping lower, dangerously quiet. "You are bleeding, you are shivering, and yet you stand there and speak to me as if we are discussing the weather. Would you prefer I scream, Shenze?" I asked, deliberately using his name without his title. A crime punishable by death. The guards outside the door shifted, hands dropping to the hilts of their swords, but Shenze didn't order my execution. He just stared at my lips, then up to my eyes. The silence stretched between us, pulling tight like a bowstring about to snap. "No," Shenze finally murmured, his gaze darkening. "I prefer you exactly as you are," maddening. He turned sharply, his silver-embroidered cloak sweeping through the air. "Bring him out," Shenze commanded the guards, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "Take him to the Eastern Pavilion. Have the physicians treat his back, bathe him, dress him in proper silk." I frowned, pushing away from the wall. "The Eastern Pavilion? That's the inner court. What game are you playing now?" Shenze paused at the door, looking back at me over his shoulder. The torchlight caught the icy gleam in his eyes. "You are done being a shadow guard, Jian. You are no longer to hide in the corners of my palace. From today onward, you are my personal scribe and tea attendant. You will sit at my right hand. You will not leave my sight. I want you where I can see you, every hour of every day." He walked out before I could argue, leaving me standing in the cold cell, staring at the empty doorway. A personal scribe, confined to the inner palace, bound to the emperor's side. I let out a long, exhausted breath. For a man who just wanted to fade into the background and survive, this was a logistical nightmare. And if you are enjoying this forbidden royal tension, this slow-burn dance of power, defiance, and hidden desires, remember the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation of these stories is available right now on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. If you want to know exactly what happens behind closed palace doors when the tension finally breaks and the Emperor loses his legendary control, the deeper versions are waiting for you. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Now, let's return to the imperial court. The Eastern Pavilion was suffocatingly beautiful. It was a sprawling courtyard filled with red maple trees, manicured rock gardens, and paper screens painted with sweeping landscapes. My new chambers were right next to the Emperor's private study. The physicians came. They cleaned the wounds on my back, applied cooling herbal pastes that smelled of mint and lotus, and bandaged me tightly. For the first time in 5 years, I was given robes that weren't made of coarse, scratchy cotton. I was dressed in deep emerald silk, soft and flowing, the color of my old kingdom. It was a deliberate choice by Shenze, a reminder of what I had lost, or perhaps a cruel way of dressing up his favorite possession. For the next month, my life became a quiet, intense game of chess. I spent my days kneeling gracefully at the low rosewood table in the Emperor's study. I ground the ink on his jade inkstone. I brewed his tea, pouring the steaming green liquid into delicate porcelain cups. I sorted his scrolls. I said nothing unless spoken to. I was perfectly obedient, perfectly polite, and entirely unreachable. It drove Shenze absolutely out of his mind. He would sit at his massive wooden desk, a mountain of imperial decrees before him, but his eyes were rarely on the paper. I could feel his gaze on me. It was a physical weight. Whenever I looked down, I knew he was watching the line of my neck, the way my hair fell over my shoulder, the slow, precise movements of my hands as I prepared his tea. If I looked up and caught him staring, he wouldn't look away. He would hold my gaze with a dark, territorial intensity that made my mouth go dry. He was testing me. He was waiting for me to crack, to show a sign of anger, of sorrow, of anything. But I gave him nothing but a blank, serene mask. The first crack in our careful dynamic happened on a night when the sky broke open. It was late autumn, and a violent thunderstorm was raging outside. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the clay roof tiles of the pavilion. Lightning flashed, casting sharp, jagged shadows across the rice paper walls. I was alone in the Imperial Archives, a massive library of bamboo slips and ancient texts just down the hall from Shenze's study. I had been sent to retrieve a specific map of the western borders. The archives were dark, lit only by a single lantern I carried. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and rain. I was reaching up to a high shelf, stretching my arm to grab a heavy wooden box, when a sudden clap of thunder shook the entire building. I didn't hear him enter over the noise of the storm. I only realized I wasn't alone when a large, warm hand suddenly clamped over mine, stopping me from pulling the box down. I gasped, spinning around. Shenze was standing right behind me. He was too close. There was barely an inch of space between my chest and his. He had discarded his heavy imperial outer robes and was wearing only an inner robe of black silk, slightly open at the collar, revealing the strong, pale skin of his throat. His hair was loose, catching the dim golden light of my lantern. He looked down at me, his pale eyes completely unreadable in the shadows. "Your Majesty," I breathed, my heart suddenly hammering violently against my ribs. I tried to step back, but my shoulders hit the wooden bookshelf. I was trapped between the towering shelves and the Emperor of the known world. "I was just getting the map you asked for." "I didn't ask for a map," Shenze murmured. His voice was a low rumble, blending with the thunder outside. "The eunuch said—" "I lied to the eunuch," Shenze interrupted softly. He didn't step back. In fact, he leaned in a fraction closer. The heat radiating off his large body was overwhelming. The scent of pine and sandalwood wrapped around me, intoxicating and heavy. "I wanted you to come here." I stared up at him, my breath hitching involuntarily. "Why?" Shenze lifted his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out. I flinched slightly out of habit, expecting a harsh grip or a reprimand, but his touch was gentle, so incredibly, terribly gentle. His long, calloused fingers brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His knuckles grazed my cheekbone. The contrast of his warm skin against the cool air of the library sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. "Because," Shenze whispered, his eyes dropping to my lips. "In the study, surrounded by guards and ministers, you wear a mask, Jian. You act like a perfect soulless doll. But here, in the dark, you breathe faster." "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice betraying me by trembling slightly. "Your heart is racing," Shenze stated. He moved his hand from my cheek, trailing his fingers slowly down my neck, coming to rest flat against the center of my chest. He could feel my heartbeat, frantic and wild against his palm. "Are you afraid of me, my prince?" The old title hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't called me that in 5 years. "I am not a prince anymore," I said, my voice hardening, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "I am your servant, and I am not afraid of you, Shenze. I just want to be left alone." "Liar," he breathed. He stepped completely into my space. The front of his black silk robe brushed against my chest. He raised his other hand, slamming it onto the bookshelf right beside my head, effectively caging me in. "For 5 years," Shenze said, his voice laced with a dark, suffocating intensity, "I broke your kingdom. I took your crown. I made you kneel in the dirt. I did everything I could to make you hate me." "And I did," I whispered fiercely. "I hated you more than life itself." "Then why did you stop?" Shenze demanded, his pale eyes flashing with sudden desperate anger. "Why did you go cold? Why do you look at me now as if I am nothing to you? Hate me, Jian. Curse my name. Fight me. But do not look right through me as if I do not exist." The raw vulnerability in his voice stunned me. The ruthless emperor, the conqueror of nations, was standing in a dark library, practically begging a hostage to look at him with emotion. He didn't just want my obedience. He wanted my soul. "Because if I hated you," I whispered, the truth finally slipping past my defenses, "I would eventually have to feel something for you. And if I feel anything for you, I will shatter." Shenze's breath caught. He stared at me, the tension between us stretching so tight it felt like the air itself was vibrating. His pale eyes darkened, completely consumed by a hunger that terrified and thrilled me all at once. Slowly, his gaze dropped to my lips again. He leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. My hands curled into fists at my sides, gripping the fabric of my robes to stop myself from reaching out to him. He hovered there for a long, agonizing second, the unspoken desire between us screaming in the silence of the library. Then, lightning flashed brilliantly outside, followed instantly by a deafening crash of thunder. The moment broke. Shenze closed his eyes, his jaw clenching tight. He pulled away, taking a step back, putting distance between us as if he was afraid of what he might do if he stayed any closer. He turned his back to me, taking a deep, ragged breath. "Bring the map to my study when you find it," Shenze ordered, his voice returning to its cold, emotionless state. He walked out of the library, disappearing into the dark corridor. I sagged against the bookshelf, my knees trembling so violently I almost collapsed. I pressed a hand over my eyes, letting out a shaky breath. The dynamic between us had shifted, and I knew with terrifying certainty that it was a shift neither of us could survive. A week later, the court was thrown into chaos. Winter was approaching, and with it came the annual Imperial Winter Hunt. It was a massive, week-long festival where the emperor, the royal family, and the highest-ranking generals rode into the northern snowy forests to hunt stags and wolves. But this year, there was an added political pressure. I was kneeling at the tea table in the corner of the study when the Prime Minister brought it up. "Your Majesty," the old bearded minister said, bowing deeply, "the court urges you to use this winter hunt to formally select an empress. The princess of the Wei clan will be in attendance. She is beautiful, intelligent, and her family commands the eastern armies. It is time for an heir." I was in the middle of pouring hot water into a cup. My hand froze. A single tiny drop of boiling water splashed onto my knuckles. It stung, but I didn't flinch. I kept my head down, staring blankly at the tea leaves swirling in the water. Why did my chest suddenly feel so hollow? Why did the thought of Shenze marrying a Wei princess make a cold, bitter knot form in my stomach? I was his prisoner. I shouldn't care who he married. I placed the teapot down silently. At the desk, Shenze did not look at the Prime Minister. His pale eyes bypassed the old man entirely and landed directly on me. He saw my pause. He saw the microscopic tightening of my jaw. "I will consider it," Shenze told the minister, his voice flat, but his eyes never left my face. "You are dismissed." When the doors closed and we were alone, the silence in the room was deafening. I stood up, holding the tray with his tea, and walked over to the desk. I kept my eyes politely downcast as I set the cup before him. "You're burning," Shenze said quietly. I paused. "The tea is at the correct temperature, Your Majesty." "Not the tea," Shenze reached out. Before I could pull away, his large hand gently caught my wrist. He turned my hand over, exposing the small red burn mark on my knuckles where the water had splashed. His thumb gently brushed over the red skin. The touch was impossibly soft, sending a cascade of sparks shooting up my arm. "You slipped," Shenze murmured, his pale eyes searching my face. The perfect, untouchable Prince Jian dropped his guard. Why? "It was an accident." I tried to pull my wrist back, but his grip tightened, not to hurt, but to hold. "Did it bother you?" Shenze asked, his voice dropping to that dangerous, intimate register he only used when we were alone. "The thought of a Wei princess in my bed?" I looked up at him, my pride finally snapping. "What does it matter to me, Shenze?" I asked, my voice laced with a bitter edge I couldn't hide. "You are the Emperor. You can have the Wei princess. You can have 1,000 princesses. It is your duty, and it is my duty to pour your tea." I yanked my hand free. Shenze stood up slowly. His towering frame cast a shadow over me. "Is that jealousy I hear, Jian?" He stepped closer, a dark, triumphant gleam in his eyes. "It is exhaustion," I lied, stepping back. "I asked for your permission to remain at the palace during the winter hunt. I am not a hunter. I have no place there." Shenze's expression instantly darkened. The triumphant gleam vanished, replaced by an immovable, cold authority. "Request denied," he ordered coldly. "You will ride by my side. If I hunt, you hunt. If I freeze, you freeze. Do you understand me?" I clenched my fists, bowing stiffly. "As you command, Your Majesty." I turned and walked out of the study, my heart pounding in my chest. The northern forests were a sea of white snow and dark pine. The winter hunt was a grand spectacle. Hundreds of guards, flags snapping in the icy wind, and nobles riding on massive war horses. I rode slightly behind Shenze, wrapped in a heavy white fox fur cloak he had personally ordered for me. The air was bitterly cold, freezing the breath in our lungs. We had been tracking a large stag for hours. Shenze, riding his black stallion, had pushed far ahead of the main hunting party. Only a dozen elite Imperial guards and myself remained with him as we entered a deep, narrow gorge surrounded by high, snow-covered cliffs. The silence of the forest was absolute, and then my instincts, honed by years of surviving a fallen kingdom, screamed. I saw a flash of silver on the ridge above. "Ambush!" I roared, kicking my horse forward. It happened in the span of a single heartbeat. A hail of black-fletched arrows rained down from the cliffs. 2 of the elite guards fell instantly, arrows piercing their armor. The snowy gorge erupted into chaos. Assassins, dressed in white to blend with the snow, dropped from the trees like ghosts. They held curved, poisoned blades. This wasn't a rebellion. This was a targeted, professional assassination attempt on the Emperor. Shenze drew his sword, a massive blade of dark steel, and instantly engaged 2 assassins, cutting them down with brutal, terrifying efficiency. But there were too many. An assassin slipped past the guards, leaping off a rock directly toward Shenze's blind side, raising a poisoned dagger aimed straight for the Emperor's neck. Shenze was engaged. He wouldn't see it in time. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the political consequences. I didn't remember that I was supposed to be a helpless, broken hostage. I stood up in my stirrups and leaped off my horse. I hit the snow rolling, grabbing a dropped sword from a fallen guard. I moved with blinding speed, the speed of a Yan royal swordsman, a martial art I had kept hidden for 5 years, so Shenze would never know how dangerous I truly was. I intercepted the assassin in mid-air. My blade flashed in a crescent arc, deflecting the poisoned dagger. I spun, using the momentum to drive the hilt of my sword into the assassin's chest, sending him crashing into the snow. 3 more assassins rushed me. I let my suppressed instincts take over. I danced through the snow, my sword moving like flowing water. I dodged a strike, parried another, and slashed through their defenses. For the first time in 5 years, I was not a servant. I was Prince Jian of Yan, a warrior born. I killed 2, but the third was fast. As I spun to protect Shenze's flank, the third assassin threw a hidden throwing knife. I twisted, but the blade caught me in the side, slicing deep through the fur cloak and into my ribs. White-hot pain flared through my body. I stumbled, dropping to one knee in the snow, gasping for air. Jian! A roar of absolute unhinged fury tore through the gorge. Shenze moved like a demon. He abandoned all defense, cleaving through the remaining assassins with a terrifying, bloodthirsty rage. Within seconds, the snow was painted crimson, and the remaining attackers fled into the woods. I pressed my hand to my side, feeling the warm, sticky flow of blood soaking through my clothes. The snow beneath me was turning red. Heavy boots crunched in the snow. Shenze dropped his sword. He fell to his knees in front of me, his hands frantically reaching for me. His pale eyes, usually so cold and controlled, were wide with pure, unfiltered terror. "Jian, look at me," Shenze commanded, his voice shaking violently. He ripped his own cloak off, pressing the heavy fabric desperately against my bleeding side. "I'm fine," I coughed, wincing at the pain. "It's not deep." "You used the Yan royal sword dance," Shenze breathed, staring at my pale face, his hands trembling as they held the wound. "You hid it. For 5 years, you hid it. You could have killed me at any time. You could have escaped." I looked up at him. The snow was falling gently now, landing in his dark hair. "I know," I whispered, my vision blurring slightly from the pain. "Then why did you stay?" Shenze demanded, his voice cracking, tearing away the last of his imperial armor. "Why did you take a blade for me? Why didn't you let them kill me?" "Because," I smiled weakly, my head falling back against his arm. "Who else would pour your tea?" I passed out before I could see his reaction. When I woke up, I was not in the snow. I was in the Emperor's massive, luxurious hunting tent. The air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and burning charcoal. I was lying in a massive bed draped with thick furs. My side was heavily bandaged, throbbing with a dull, manageable ache. I turned my head. Shenze was sitting in a wooden chair beside the bed. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing a simple white inner robe, his hair unkempt, his hands clasped together, resting against his lips as he stared at me. When he saw my eyes open, he let out a jagged breath that sounded dangerously close to a sob. He didn't call for the physician. He didn't ask how I felt. He stood up, walked to the edge of the bed, and sat down beside my hip. He reached out and gently, desperately took my hand, pressing my palm against his cheek. "You've been unconscious for 2 days," Shenze whispered, his voice rough. "The physician said the blade wasn't poisoned, but the blood loss." He closed his eyes, leaning heavily into my touch. "I almost lost you." "I am a weed, Your Majesty," I rasped, trying to pull my hand away, overwhelmed by the sudden intimacy. "Hard to kill." His grip tightened instantly. He opened his eyes, and the sheer intensity in his pale gaze pinned me to the mattress. "Do not call me that," Shenze commanded softly. "Not here. Not ever again." He leaned over me. He placed his other hand on the mattress beside my head, caging me in just like he had in the library. But this time, there was no anger. There was only a desperate, consuming hunger. "You lied to me," Shenze murmured, his face hovering inches from mine. "You hid your martial arts. You hid your strength. You let me believe I had broken you, but you were just waiting." "Are you going to execute me for treason?" I asked, my heart beginning to hammer wildly in my chest. "Execute you?" Shenze let out a dark, breathless laugh. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against my jawline. I shivered, my fingers curling into the furs beneath me. "I am going to build a fortress around you. I am going to lock the doors and throw away the key. You are never leaving my side, Jian." "I am your prisoner," I whispered, turning my face slightly, completely trapped by his gravity. "You are my ruin," Shenze corrected fiercely. His lips brushed against the sensitive skin of my neck, sending a shockwave of heat straight to my core. "I conquered the world, but I am entirely at your mercy. You know it. You've always known it." He lifted his head, his pale eyes burning with a possessive fire. "Tell me you don't feel this," Shenze challenged, his voice thick with desire. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't want me exactly as much as I want you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had destroyed my life, the man who had tormented me, the man who had just torn apart a dozen assassins with his bare hands just to protect me. The walls I had built for 5 years finally, irreparably, shattered. I slowly pulled my hand free from his grip. Shenze's eyes flashed with panic, thinking I was pushing him away. Instead, I reached up. I slid my fingers into his loose, dark hair, pulling him down just a fraction of an inch closer. His breath hitched loudly in the quiet tent. "If I do this," I whispered, my voice dark and completely serious, "I am no longer your servant. I am no longer your hostage. I will not bow. I will not obey. And if you ever look at another princess, I will use that sword dance to cut your throat in your sleep." A slow, devastatingly handsome smile spread across Shenze's face. It was the smile of a predator who had finally been caught by his prey. "I look forward to it," Shenze whispered. He didn't wait for another breath. He lowered his head, and his lips finally crashed into mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an explosion. It was 5 years of pent-up frustration, hatred, forbidden longing, and political tension, shattering all at once. His large hands tangled in my hair, pulling me flush against his chest, mindful of my injured side, but completely relentless in his demand. He tasted like winter air and dangerous promises. I gasped into his mouth, my ancient pride melting away as the cold emperor claimed me with a desperate, overwhelming heat. I kissed him back with equal ferocity, my uninjured arm wrapping tightly around his neck, pulling him deeper into the furs as the snow continued to fall outside, burying our past and sealing our dangerous, passionate future. If you want the next part, the completely uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ ancient royal BL stories, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. The 5 years of tension have finally broken, and what happens next behind the closed flaps of that hunting tent is waiting for you. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment. I'll see you there.